Joining me now is Dr. Lee Merritt. Is there a doctor in the house? Indeed, there is. Her name is Lee Merritt, and she's been on the front line warning us about, well, so many of the things that have now come to pass. People thought it was crazy talk. They're listening now. They realize it's all been true all along. Dr. Lee, welcome back to the broadcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Lee, let's get right into it. There's a lot of fear they're trying to generate now. WHO convenes urgent meeting. This is an article over at worldviewreport.com tonight, your aggregated news site. There it is, worldviewreport.com. And here's the one I want to talk to you about to start with before we go to others. WHO convenes urgent meeting over outbreak of Marburg virus, one of the world's deadliest diseases that kills 90% of patients and has no cure. You have been on record on my show several times warning that this is what the deep state wants. They want a Marburg type event. Bleeding from the nose, bleeding from the eyes, something that they can show on television, even if it only happens to a very, very small percentage of people, just enough to freak everybody out and give them the reason to surrender our sovereignty to the United Nations, Bill Gates, and their WHO that they control, right?
Yeah. And, they're talking about a cyber pandemic. So I'm just going to tell you, I've been going down this rabbit hole about the whole genetic manipulation, viruses, do they exist? What's really going on here? And I will tell you, this is one of the reasons I think we're being scammed in a real scientific way. When you look at, I've looked at Feng Zhang at the MIT lab and what he said about genetic manipulation. And he's the guy that's credited with CRISPR, and he says you really can't do what they're saying about precise genetic engineering. You can't precisely put things into genes and do all that sort. You can do gene knockdown, but that's not really it. What his PhD is really in is optogenetics, using wavelength to change genetic presentation, so how the genes function. Now, that's important because Marburg is very interesting. I stumbled across a guy named Kuznachev. Kuznachev was a Russian doctor researcher in Novosibirsk in the 1920s. And he showed that you can actually electromagnetically transmit disease patterns. So he would poison cells in one chamber, and then he would, in another chamber, watch what the linked cells would do that weren't poisoned. And if he separated them by window glass, nothing happened. But if he separated them by quartz glass, he could make the cells that were dying in chamber A, they gave off something. They called them, the Russians called them photoni smert, the death photons. And apparently they're in the ultraviolet wavelength, which is why they'll go through quartz but not through window glass. And if he poisoned the side A with arsenic, he'd have arsenic death in side B. If he poisoned side A with, cyanide or radiation, he'd have radiation death in side B. So what's going on here is there's something that sick tissues give off that can make other tissues sick, that's of an electromagnetic nature. That's what his research showed. But let's suppose you captured those photons and then you release them, you broadcast them. You want to make a disease? I pick a disease, I broadcast them. This is, interestingly, I got demonetized from Substack, not writing about genetic engineering and CRISPR and all that stuff. They didn't care. I could go down that road all I wanted to. The minute I went down this road, I got demonetized. The minute Luc Montagnier, famous Nobel laureate, came up, he thought, with the HIV virus sequence, and then he said, oops, wait, that's wrong. That doesn't exist. That's not right. But they gave it to him anyway. But the minute he talked about electromagnetic signature of bioactive molecules, boom, he was not their darling anymore. Same with Jacques Bienveniste, who used to have a 4,000 square foot office, big famous researcher in France. He mentioned that electromagnetic signature of bioactive molecules were left behind in water, and you could capture it, you could recreate it. Boom, he's now in the parking lot in a trailer. So there is a pattern here. I'm not in their league, but it does seem to get demonetized.
So how would this work? Explain how this would work and how it would fit in with an EMP attack or a cyber attack.
Yeah, so this is the potential for a cyber pandemic. They don't lie. They just tell you weird words. That they could broadcast with a certain frequency. So they want you, I think viruses are, as I think it was James Robinson in 1786 or something said in a book, he talked about mythical objects. You can take a mythical object that doesn't really exist, but you can be a shaman and you can convince people this mythical object will do this in this situation and then do that in another situation. And it's a great thing to control populations, because if they believe in the mythical object, then you can make them believe anything that's going on is related to it. That's what they're doing with viruses. They're telling you, oh, it's COVID over here. Oh, that's influenza. Now we got another pandemic over here and there. Now it's going to be Marburg. But I'm telling you, this is a lie. The way they're doing this, I think it's a lie. And here's why Marburg kind of raised my sensitivity to that. People, how many people, if you went up on the street and you said, what's Marburg? They would either tell you it's a city in Germany, or they would tell you, most of them would say, oh, that's a viral disease. It's really bad that we're all worried about. But there are less than 700 cases in the world. 700 cases in a world of 8.5 billion people. So again, it's that makes you think propaganda, right? There's nothing, that's not real. I've gone back and I've looked at every one of those cases. And for example, there's a case of, well, I can't go into details, but it's like they make conclusions based on nothing. But the real story here is Kosnocheyev's work doesn't get in. If it got into the English literature, it's been censored. You try and find it in English, you can't find it. But it got in. The Russians took it up. Some other Russians took it up in the 30s and 40s, and then it went to Germany. And where did it go in Germany? To the lab at Marburg. And the Marburg, there was the first outbreak of Marburg. Didn't happen in Angola or someplace. It happened in Marburg, Germany, in this lab. That suddenly 31 people got very, very sick, and they had bleeding eyes, and they had all the things we think of hemorrhagic fever. Very colorful. Many of them died. I think most of them died. I can't remember the exact details on that. But I think it was 31 victims. And they claimed it was, oh, yes, they'd been working with the green monkeys, okay? But that's kind of I don't know. That's a nice tale. I just don't believe it. There are only other two big outbreaks of Marburg, and they both involved miners, like gold miners, maybe some other kind of miner of a very precious metal, that in Africa during outbreaks of war, during times of unrest, and they killed like several hundred miners in one of them, and 200 in one, 300 in another, something like that. You got to wonder about that also just being a land acquisition, asset acquisition thing, or a test of a bioweapon against those people. But again, it didn't kill anybody else. It just killed them. Now, does that sound to you like just common sense? You don't need a lot of scientific background to say, if this were a deadly airborne virus, which they're going to convince it is, we all have to stay indoors, we have to all do all these 6 feet and all that junk again. It won't make sense because it doesn't work that way. If it did, we would have had other people outside the lab get sick. We would have, in the history of the world with Marburg, it's basically a few bioweaponeers and those gold miners. That's it.
Wow. Let's flip. So what you're asking is, the question you're asking is, are the globalists planning a cyber virus? Is that the question you're asking?
Well, essentially, they're going to use this. If they're going to use this principle, it's wavelength. Don't be suckered into a virus. It's not about being near people. It's about being near those towers.
Wow. Let's go to this one. Here's another one that's coming out. Bird flu may mutate to kill more than 50% of humans who catch it as a result of unprecedented outbreaks sweeping mammals, experts fear. So apparently, I guess this is now going to jump from certain animals and the birds or whatever, and now over to mammals, i.e. humans, and could kill 50% of humans. Boy, they just keep stoking the fear. What's going on here, you think?
Well, they're after your food supply. You know what they're doing? Iowa's the chicken capital. Sorry, I'm having a little asthma attack here. Iowa's the chicken capital of the country, and they're going around. They do these PCR tests. All this became possible because, and they killed Kerry Mullis. He would have spoken out against this, but once they used the PCR test, they can convince you that they can take a test with 16 bases. They can check an animal with billions of base pairs and tell them that they've got some kind of virus. And then we have to destroy them all. They're destroying millions of chickens in our state. I'm sure in other states.
So you say that the bird flu agenda is going to be used to go after our food supply. So not only are we talking about now going after the cattle and the meat and now the chicken, but then we have the hens to lay the eggs, and now we got studies showing that eggs are a great way to cure COVID, correct?
Isn't that amazing how that just happened to come out, and then we started killing birds? But I'm just gonna, and I've talked to you before about the Ukrainian situation, and I just got to make this point while I'm on air, because all these crazy things, the great balloon distraction, the great balloon invasion, which could have been something. I mean, think about weaponized aerosolized fentanyl up there. I mean, I'm not saying these aren't potential weapons against us, but
Right.
there's too many things too weird happening all at once. You know, it certainly is damaging the train derailment. That's horrible.
Yes.
But I tell you one thing that might even be worse, and I'm going to say I can't completely prove this right now, but it's starting to get out there. And I read the war reports from Ukraine and Russia every night, and I try and read the Russian reports, not just ours, but the stuff in their language. And I'm telling you what's starting to come out. First, we saw the Russian soldiers picking up these, especially the Wagner group comes out, and they show these drones that the Ukrainians have, and that the drones are landing, and they pick them up, and they're kind of showing, hey, we shot down another drone, and they're picking them up and showing it. And then they started seeing drones that had canisters on it. Look at this. I wonder what that's all about. Well, in the last couple days, I saw a couple Russian officers talking to enlisted saying, don't touch the drones. You touch them, you die.
Whoa.
Okay? Yes. Then we see a picture. Presumably, this is not taken by a Russian. So the idea this is all Russian propaganda. No, this could not. I don't think this would be taken by a Russian, because I don't think a Russian would let this happen to another Russian. Here's this guy down in a ditch, and in war there are all these ditches with small water in it. This couldn't have had more than 1 feet of water. This guy is drowning because he can't. He's trying. You can tell he's really trying to move his hands and his feet and get himself positioned, but he's like a turtle that can't turn over because he's been poisoned with something, and it is the classic look of a nerve agent. Now, there's a group of contact. We know a lot about contact toxins, contact poisons in the bioweapons world. I say they do, but the V-class bioweapons. You hear about VX, but there's VX, VG, there are a whole bunch of Vs, and some of them are contact. Okay, you put them on surfaces, people touch them, they die. That's what this looks like. And if this is true, I'm just making this point. Not China, not Russia, not North Korea, not any of our ostensible enemies, but NATO, which is us. The United States of America has released a weapon of mass destruction against the Russians. And that is what they're covering up. I think that's what all this distraction is.
And if that's the case, of course, that goes further with the idea of the CIA to get us involved in World War III.
They're poking the bear.
Absolutely.
They're poking the bear with things that Putin, they thought they could blow up the pipeline and that would, do it. They thought they could, bomb the Donbass Russian civilians and that would do it. Well, he's been the adult in the room. And I have to say right now, his comment has just come out, said, I'm not after the American people, I'm after the globalists.
Who said that?
Now, Putin.
Okay.
Yeah, Putin. So I give him credit for being the adult in the room. I do hope, if he's after the globalists, I hope you take out Warren Buffett when he's not home, because I live about 30 miles from his house. And in the old days of the Soviet war machine, their nuclear weapons, by the way, were kind of a spray and pray kind of thing. They had bigger bombs than we did because they didn't hit the target as well. So I don't want them to do that. But this is not really a joke-making moment, because I'm going to tell you, after 10 years in military service myself, thinking I was, doing the right thing for my country, to find out we would do something like this, we always think they're the bad guys. We've been, all my years, I remember defending the United States, saying, no, we wouldn't do things like that. And it looks like we're doing something like this.
You gotta watch my radio show today that is also a TV show at 2. It comes on from 1 to 2 Central here. Let's see if Annie's got it online yet. If you go to WVWTV.com, see, you're like me, because I'm sitting there trying to defend that, hey, I'm patriotic, I love America, I'm patriotic, but I'm not stupid. Well, there it is. It's loading right now. You can see that it's loading. So it's loading in the next few minutes. It should be available. U.S. government, history of false flag operations and inhumane treatment of Americans. Part 1 today, Part 2 tomorrow. I'm going through how our military, our Army, was spraying poisons, radiation, doing radiation tests and stuff on the people of St. Louis and Corpus Christi, Texas. I went into the CIA doing their MLK Ultra and going up into Canada, into an institute up there, taking people with asthma. You mentioned asthma. With asthma, and then they end up knocking them out for 30 days. And while they're out for 30 days, they're giving them shock therapy and trying to erase their brain. This is our CIA doing this. They finally had to come out and admit it. I'm going through one inhumane thing after another. The stuff of Nazi Germany that our own CIA and government has done to the American people. Of course, we have to remember what they did to the poor black farmers down in Alabama. with the Tuskegee project down there and syphilis. I mean, I could go on and on. I could do this for weeks on end and show you one corrupt government program after another where they treat the human people like dogs, lesser than humans, forced sterilization of black people in America. I mean, you want to talk about racism? Fine, let's talk about it. But let's talk about who's responsible. Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, who worked with Nazi doctors, and the eugenics crowd, not conservative people of faith, constitutionists, pro-lifers. You know, this is all psychological projection. They're calling us racist when they are the ones with the racist history. And now we see what they're doing to the poor, and many of them seem to be poor, the poor, financially poor people of Ohio there in that little town.
Oh, yeah.
Philistine. And I mean, give me a break. You know, and like the Congressman Glenn Grotham said tonight, we all know Pete Buttigieg only got the job because he's gay. That's the only reason he's got the job. And they could care less about those people in Iowa. They're useless eaters to them. They want to kill most of us anyway. They're doing it with the clot shot. Those they're not killing, they're arresting them and harassing them and suing them and doing whatever else. The government at the central level doesn't care about us. And what they're doing to those poor people in Ohio is a perfect example.
Yeah, you know, in the big picture here, we're not a nation. We're not a world of nation states. We're a world of factions, and there's a deep cabal that runs through the world, and they don't care about national borders. They're waging a war against us, against everyday humans, and Peru. No, Ohio is just another example of that. But you know, you mentioned the Nazis and the thing. You know, people don't realize everybody wants to cite the Nuremberg thing. Oh, we need a Nuremberg 2. They need to understand what really happened at Nuremberg 1, because at Nuremberg 1, quite frankly, the Harvard boys came over. It was Leo Alexander and a bunch of guys that were in the prosecution of the Nuremberg at the doctor's trial, and I can't remember the doctor's name. It's like Stittlinger or something. He started with an S. He was hung in front of his wife because at the end of the trial, after found guilty, he was hung in front of his family, his wife, and he had been a professor at a university, and he had been doing research on malaria using these prisoners, and 10 of them died. Okay, I'm not trying to justify that, but nonetheless, so if you're a prisoner, by definition, you're under coercion, right? So the Harvard guys, and specifically Dr. Ivy, went back to Harvard. We didn't have a code of ethics. We were doing the same things. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, we weren't doing them on the Japanese in the work camps, but we were doing them on prisoners in America. And Dr. Ivy went back to and Alexander, these guys went back to Harvard, and they wrote up the Nuremberg principles, the codes of ethics that they claimed they were using to do research, and they went back and used this to hang the Nazi doctors. Now, one of those doctors was Karl Brandt. He was the chief medical officer for Hitler, and he was squeaking. He was saying, listen, this is not right, because he wasn't experimenting on anybody in the camps. His problem was he was the titular head of the medical department, and he'd signed some things, right? He'd agreed to some programs. But he pointed out that the malaria experiments in the Nazi camps were using a less virulent form of malaria than Dr. Ivy himself was using on prisoners in the United States during the war. He was doing the same research. That's why
you are saying exactly what I read today in some of my research preparing for this show on the horrible things we've done. At the Nuremberg trial, they actually said, wait a minute, what you're accusing us of, your own government was doing the same thing, but worse.
Right,
and that's not to justify the Nazis, but what I'm saying is, and that's of course that's how Adolf Hitler, as a young man, was reading the writings coming out of America about eugenics and said, "Oh, I'll copy that." We've exported a lot of this around the world.
Yeah, Karl Brandt actually, and I'm not trying to be an apologist for him either, but he was a good surgeon who actually saved a lot of lives in World War II by his personal actions. He was just in an evil system. But at this point, he decided he's going to speak up, and he said, look, well, you guys were doing as much or more than we were, and that's why they hung him, I think.
Yep.
You know, well, and it just goes on and on. I mean, unfortunately, it's not what people think.
Yeah, well, I went on to talk today about Operation Northwoods, which wasn't even declassified until 1997, which was our government presenting a plan in 1962 to President JFK to carry out a bunch of false flags and crash airplanes and bomb people and kill people, making it look like the Nazis, I mean, excuse me, the communists out of Cuba. I'm not defending Castro and communism, but our own government at the Joint Chiefs of Staff level and the highest rankings levels of the CIA and the military were presenting to the president the idea of killing Americans so they could justify invading Cuba. And that didn't go so well for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
At that time, we had some moral people up there.
Well, that's because JFK said, "Oh, we're not doing that. I'm sorry.
We're not doing that." Yeah, yeah. But remember the Maine. We've already done it in a way.
Well, and then of course they blew his head off the next year because he wouldn't play ball with them, right?
Yeah, there's so many reasons. There were so many people he annoyed by being upright, forthright.
Yep. And he said he was going to take the CIA and break it into 1,000 pieces. So there you go.
Yeah. And
themedicalrebel.com, themedicalrebel.com. I don't know where my theme music is, but it should have played already, guys. There you go. You're 1 minute late. Silk, it's not my fault. It's the guys in the control room. Sorry, Silk. All right, thank you, Dr. Lee. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Her website is themedicalrebel.com. I kept looking at my clock thinking, where's my music? I got to get out of the way and make room for Silk. Themedicalrebel.com is her website. Mine is WVWTV.com, WVWTV.com. I was going to share a few things with you tonight. I'll find time maybe tomorrow night. I wanted to mention a passage out of the book of Daniel. Do demons or demonic entities influence leaders and nations? The book of Daniel seems to say so. Tomorrow night I'll address that issue partly for a while. Has America been given over to a form of Satanism that's impacting our leaders? We'll talk about that and more tomorrow night. Thanks for watching. I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.